Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion App course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on IamTimCorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. Now let's set up our global usings. Now these may expand over time, but let's get started with some basics just to make our life a little easier. We're going to start with the Blazor server app. So let's create a file on the root. So right click and say add class. We're going to say GlobalUsings.cs. Now this, we can take away the everything here basically. I prefer usings.cs, but it's seemingly appearing a trend to use globalUsings.cs for our global usings instead of usings.cs. I am fine with that. It's a personal preference how you use it. My personal project, I'll probably use usings until it really becomes a standard to use global usings, in which case I'll switch over to the standard because I prefer to develop on the standard, but at the same time, I have my own preferences as well, and I'll use those until it becomes a widely used standard. So I'm going to create some usings in here that will reference my class library project specifically, but I don't have anything in these folders, therefore it's not easy I can't just reference it. So if I said global using and I said suggestion app library, notice it's not even let me do that. And then I say dot and it's like, no, I can't find that namespace. You might say, well, maybe you're missing a reference. Nope, that's not it. The issue is I have no classes in here in my library, therefore there are no namespaces mentioned in here. So if I right click on my, let's say models first, and I say add new class, I know I'm going to need a model for my suggestions. So suggestion model, and I'm not going to put anything in here. By the way, this should be a control dot to convert to a file scope namespace. It seems to happen the first time. Not sure why that happens. I'll get rid of the using statements I don't need. I'll make it public just to be a good citizen here. Let's clean it all up. But now I can add, notice control J here, models. So I can add the SuggestionAppLibrary.models because I have something that's using that namespace. The namespace does not exist because you have a folder there. It exists because you have a file that uses that namespace. So the folder structure is just there to help you organize things. The namespaces come from actually creating or using those namespaces, which means that I need another one. Let's create a file here, a class here called dbConnection. Now, again, I'm going to use this. Notice I have to the first time, it's fine. But that first time, for some reason, it uses the old system. But I'm going to public. I'm going to use this for starting the connection to MongoDB. But for right now, I'm not going to leave anything. I'm not going to put anything in here. I'm just going to leave it as such so that I can come over to my global usings and say global using suggestion app library. Not .services. There are no .services, but there is the data access. So now I have two global usings in my SuggestionAppUI project. This is the project that will reference my class library. And so I'll be using my models and my data access significantly throughout my project. Therefore, I'll add these global usings to make my life easier. Now, I could go through and look at, because Blazor also has this imports, I could go through here and look at this and say, okay, let's move some things over. I'm not going to do that. I'll leave these as they are. These are pretty standard. But for my usings, I'm just going to put these in here moving forward so that we have a place that is centrally used that we can all point to and say that's where the usings are. I am not going to go into my project and add any using statements in here and modify the implicit usings. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to add my own in this easily discoverable file at the root called GlobalUsings. It's very clear what it's doing. This again is a newer standard that came in .NET 6. So if you're in .NET 5 and before, you can't do this, but you can now, which makes life a lot easier for us when we're working with libraries where we're not going to step on toes to call it and to have a global using. Okay, so this kind of keeps our code files shrunk down as much as possible. So that's how I use global usings in the Blazor server project. Now let's do the same thing for our class library project. So we'll right click on our library. We'll say add to add a class at the root. We'll call it global usings. And we get rid of everything in here because this is not actually a class or it's just a class file. So in here we'll say global using SuggestionAppLibrary.models. And that's because in our DB connection and other places, we're going to reference those models a lot. Those models are what we're going to deal with when talking about data. So it makes sense to have this be a global using because everything in the data access folder will have to reference those models. Therefore, we just make a global using, and it's global for the library, not for our entire solution. Remember, these projects are independent of each other. Now, our Blazor server app does depend on our class library, but as a whole, not as individual pieces. So we build our class library into a DLL and then depend on that in our Blazor server app. So therefore, we have to have independent global usings files, which makes sense because this global using file is different than my Blazor server global using. In this project, or this global using, I only depend on models or only add that to the global usings because of the fact that the data access folder doesn't need to be added here. The models will not know about the data access folder. They don't ever have to reference things in the data access folder. Therefore, we only need the global using for our models, which a lot of classes will reference. And again, you don't have to use this. You could just put at the top of every file, you could say using model SuggestionAppLibrary.models. But this just cuts down one line of code in a number of files. So that's how we'll set things up for our class library. Again, we might change this as it goes down the road, but probably we'll stick pretty close to just this one global using. And again, we're putting it in the same place in a project, so right in the root. Therefore, it's very easily visible, and we can expect if it's in the root of this project, the UI project, it will be in the root of the library project as well. So make sure you're consistent with where you place things. Now let's move our dependencies out of, or dependency injection out of program.cs. So program.cs for our Blazor server project has our dependency injection configuration just on line 7 and 8. So this seems like simple and innocuous, and that's fine to put it in this section. However, this program.cs is starting to do a lot of stuff. So it's kind of a quarterback. It's trying to do multiple things, but then it's also starting to do other work itself. So instead of just saying, hey, build and redirect and static files and all the rest and run, it's saying, okay, yeah, those things, but also let's configure our dependency injection. So that seems small right now, but when we actually use it in a real project, our dependency injection will grow significantly. Every time we add a new dependency, we have to put it into dependency injection. So this is going to get to be a number of files or a number of lines long, and it's going to clog up this program.cs file. So let's right-click on SuggestionAppUI. We're going to add a new class. Let's call this Register Services. And we're going to make this a static class. So a public static class. And we're going to have one method in here, public static void configure services. And we'll pass in this web application builder. Now, what am I doing here? Well, I'm creating, let's unpin this, or let's actually shrink it down a little bit. What I'm doing here is I'm creating a extension method. And what this will do is it will attach to the web application builder type and add the ability to say configure services. So if I hit save here and come back over here, I can say, right in my class, I can say builder.register. Well, I can't yet because I have to have a using statement. So let's add a using for this namespace. There we go. So now I can say register. Goodness. Configure. That's why. Configure services, not register services. When IntelliSense doesn't give you the right stuff, I'll go back and look at why. Configure services. How about that? So this line right here, configure services, will take the place of this stuff. In fact, we're going to cut this out. And I did cut, Control X. Therefore, I can come over here and I can paste it back in. So now I have moved my dependency injection configuration behind a method called configure services. I have to pass a parameter in because this is an extension method. That's what this is here for. I could have not used an extension method and just passed builder in as a parameter. That would have worked as well, but this I think is a little bit more clean and it fits in line with everything else that's happening in this file where we just say, hey, just do this, just do this, just do this. So in this case, the just do this is configure services. We could have also called it configure dependency injection or configure injection or whatever you want to call it, but configure services is what we're going to call it. And we just moved everything over here. Get rid of the code comment here. We just moved everything over to our configure services method. So we haven't changed how the app works, except we've cleaned up program.cs and made it a little bit easier to read and taken away some responsibility that should be somewhere else. In this case, in this method. Now let's make sure this builds and runs. So it's going to do a clean solution. The idea behind a clean solution is that it will get rid of all your previous build stuff. So normally when you build an application, when you hit run, it's going to say, hey, what's changed? And let's only build or configure that stuff. And if it hasn't changed, let's go ahead and use the old version. Every once in a while, that can cause you a problem. If you're getting rid of services and changing how services work, that might be a case where the system doesn't realize that everything has changed because your dependencies have changed. So therefore, it might have a problem. It probably won't, but just in case, I hit clean. Clean will get rid of everything. And then when I hit run, it will start from fresh and build everything up. Might take a little longer to build, but that's okay. So we're going to hit build here. It's going to build both of our projects and then execute them. And we're just making sure that, in fact, it does launch and run. And it did. Now, we're not using much as far as dependency injection, but we are using Razor Pages and Blazor, server-side Blazor. So therefore, this would not execute if these two services weren't there. Therefore, it works. So with that, we know that we haven't made a breaking change, but we have moved our configuration out of our program.cs and into this file. From now on, when we configure dependency injection, we'll do it here instead of in program.cs. Now let's add caching to our Blazor server project. We know we need to have in-memory caching at least. That's what we're going to start with, and we probably won't change from that. We'll probably just use in-memory caching for all of our caching needs. Now, to add caching to an application, it's really not hard. All we need to do is, in our configure services, we can say builder.services.add memory cache. That's it. We have now configured caching for our Blazor server project. So we don't need anything else. And you may say, well, Tim, but what about accessing the cache? And why is there no NuGet package here? Notice that if we go to our AppUI project, there's no NuGet package here for caching. So why is that? When we probably remember back in the library, we did add a caching NuGet package right here. So what's the difference? Well, caching is built into web projects, so we don't need to add that as a NuGet package. It's only for other project types that we need to add the NuGet package. So we add the NuGet package to the library so that it knows about caching and how to use the cache. So therefore, it's already in Blazor server, so we just said, hey, add it. So use it. So now it's in dependency injection. And then it's in the library project because of that NuGet package, so we can talk to the cache that way. So we're done with caching.